Hello and welcome to Coinstruct, the podcast where we look at the world of finance and cryptocurrency from a more human perspective. Today we are joined by Wackett Jr. Kurt is a bit of an influencer in the Bitcoin space. He is known for his podcasts, for his publications, and also for his official title as a Chief Bitcoin Historian. He's been heavily involved in the Bitcoin space since the earliest days, and he's now a key proponent of the Bitcoin ecosystem. In this podcast, we refer to Bitcoin rather a lot. However, we are not referring just about BTC, the mammoth at the top of the charts, currently sitting around $60,000. We are actually referring to Bitcoin the system, Bitcoin the idea, which was created by Satoshi Nakamoto way back in 2008. Kurt was an early adopter of BTC Bitcoin. However, he has now pivoted to be a proponent and an adopter of Bitcoin BSV. BSV is another Bitcoin system. It is built on the same ideas, however, there are different parameters. This podcast can be somewhat technical at times, however, Kurt does his best to try and explain it to us in layman's terms. Regardless of what is said in this podcast, none of it should be considered as financial advice. I hope you enjoy listening, and I hope that you learn a thing or two. Thank you.
Yep, you sound good.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, mate. I really appreciate this.
For sure. My pleasure.
Yeah. Since I started the idea to do a podcast, one of my best crypto mates, he's been pushing me to have you on the show. He's a big, how do you say it, BSVer? What's the?
Sure. Yeah.
is there like a Link Marines version for BSVers?
I don't know. Not really. I've heard some people critically call us beavers. I don't know if that's I don't know if it's because we like to build or if it means something else, but otherwise, no, I don't know.
Yeah, I can vouch for the liking to build thing. My friend, who I will probably end up mentioning quite a few times over this podcast because he is kind of the inspiration for me inviting you on. He's part of the train of thought that people who are building on BSV are doing so in silence without any kind of expectation of massive reward or massive recognition. They are just grinding away, doing what the needfuls, as the D-gents would say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So basically, I'm going to ask you, throughout the course of this podcast, to kind of explain what BSV is, what BSV is trying to achieve, and kind of the difficulties, I would say, that it's facing in terms of public perception, and also if there's any kind of technical difficulties that it's also facing.
Sure.
So go ahead and tell us, what is Bitcoin?
Well, Bitcoin, in the most basic sense, is a chain of digital signatures that implements, or a chain of digital signatures as part of a rule set. The rule set implements a protocol that implements a network that implements a database structure. In the most basic sense, that's what Bitcoin is. You get into all the variations based on what Bitcoin is not, but I'm not going to start there.
Okay, yeah. So Bitcoin here, and again, throughout the course of this podcast, we're referring to BSV, right, rather than BTC, because obviously there's a massive difference. The behemoth at the top of the charts is BTC Bitcoin, and the one we're talking about right now is BSV Bitcoin.
I think the most fair way to put it is that there are many implementations of Bitcoin, just like in centralized databasing, there's many implementations of MySQL, for example. But if you customize your own implementation, it is a customized version of MySQL. So if you start with a basic structure, that basic structure is Bitcoin. So I very often will talk about Bitcoin as a disambiguation of the general rule set, and then I will very typically mention BTC, BSV, BCH, or whatever if I'm talking about specific implementation details.
Okay, so Bitcoin is the vision as set out in the Bitcoin white paper the idea, the concept is Bitcoin.
Yes.
And BTC is a particular implementation of Bitcoin.
Correct.
Okay. So what you said, it's a certain defined set steps. What are these steps that make Bitcoin as a Bitcoin?
So I think one of the most crucial ones is the availability of transactions for people to create transactions and broadcast them either directly to the public network, the mempool, or to send them to the node of their choice, which is not a typical thing that people do, but it was actually what Satoshi preferred. It's what he did initially. He was a big fan of actual peer-to-peer transactions. So he believed very much that it made sense to send a transaction from one transaction generator to a specific transaction processor. He even did it in an IP address to IP address manner early on because he liked the added privacy and he liked going around the network in that way. So it didn't work well because the various the IP that you were sending to needed to be online, and so if you were not online, it caused different issues. But yeah, so Bitcoin is that which allows you to broadcast, and then also the way that it is written to the database is based on competitive proof of work, and that competitive proof of work also acts as its complete governance model. So the way that Bitcoin is governed is that valid transactions are made valid by honest nodes building blocks upon other valid blocks, and anything else, all of the proof of node, proof of IP, proof of social media, and all these other things that people think governs Bitcoin truly are what I would call a soft attack on Bitcoin. I don't think that they're necessarily malicious, but just like anything, there's like a good way to drive a car or a bad way to drive a car. And when you act like Bitcoin can be governed by secondary associations or by, hey, I've spun up a $60 node and I'm never going to build a block. However, I have a vote and I'm putting my flag out there that I support a rule change or whatever. That's not really how Bitcoin functions. So Bitcoin is actually very, very simple, and that's what makes it so great. But yeah, that's in short, that's what Bitcoin is. That's how I define it.
Sure. So you're saying IP to IP. Is that essentially like IFPS? Is that this similar kind of, in the fact that there has to be a seed available for it? That because IP to IP is the ideal, really, if you're circumventing the entire system, right? You're making it peer to peer, which is what you would want for an ideally like a transparent cash system, a cashless system. Sorry.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Is it a sense of if there's no seed available, if there's no one hosting, then it doesn't work?
I think conceptually, if you were to take it out of the tech realm, the best way to explain it would be if I were to print out a Bitcoin transaction on a piece of paper and hand it to you. We're just doing the same thing digitally. So I'm sending it from computer to computer in much the same way I would send it person to person. And then the recipient then has the obligation or not. I mean, he has the option not to, but he would then upload it. He would ask to double check and see if it's been double spent or whatever. But he also doesn't have to. It's his money. He can do what he wants with.
Sure. Double spending is an interesting one, and I do want to ask you about that later, because one thing that when I was reading up about double spending, there was that maybe 2 months ago, there was the incident of the double spend on the Lightning Network, right?
Yep.
So a good, a close friend of mine, so to speak, he wrote a piece about the irresponsibility of the journalistic reporting on that double spend. He said how it's, he gave the technical kind of validation as to why it was not a problem, and then spoke about how the journalists that reported on it were doing so from an irresponsible place. When I was reading up around that time around double spending, one thing that I did find kind of tenuous about it was that in order to maintain the integrity of the blockchain, the most, the reason given was economic incentive. It was, I have it written down here somewhere, one sec. It was in the economic interest of the miner to behave according to the blockchain's rules. But that, in my opinion, is not in any way foolproof, as we know that not everything, although many things are, but not everything is in economic interest. And especially if it's something that could potentially damage a system as behemoth as Bitcoin. So please tell me why economic incentive is supposed to be foolproof in this context, because it is for the whole Bitcoin system in general, right? Not just BTC.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, absolutely. And I think the problem here is foolproof. It's this notion of perfection. BTC is developed by people that are obsessed with creating a perfect system, and they try to apply perfection in software because they want to steer human behavior in order to make the network increasingly secure, approaching absolute security. And the problem is that's a futile attempt. You can't do that. The beauty of Bitcoin is actually its flexibility. Double spends are always possible, just like reorging blocks is always possible. Like it's the only thing stopping it from happening is that economic concern. Now, if Bitcoin were to have 5 double spends a day, that would be not a valuable system for people,
Sure.
right? However, a double spend once every 2 or 3 years, especially a low value one, that's not really a concern. I mean, we have chargebacks and things in the centralized economy constantly. Visa has insurance policies, that cover these things. And that's just the nature of economics. So I think this notion of Bitcoin having to be this absolute fireproof, nuclear-proof bunker of a thing really undermines its practical use in real business, which really is its true value. If I can transact and I have a 99.999% chance of everything just working smoothly, and once every couple of years I have a double spend, and I have to get my insurance company involved or something. That's much better than my current system working with my current operating costs and the fees associated with credit cards and PayPal and whatever else. So I think people need to reframe their notions about what Bitcoin is for and what even makes it valuable in the first place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never actually heard the admission that Bitcoin doesn't need to be completely foolproof. The value is in the system, in the blockchain ledger, that the distributed ledger, but it's not essential for it to be foolproof. Not something that I've ever actually heard brought up, and I will be thinking a little bit more deeply about that. Just to make clear, I've realized that we've mentioned double spend a bunch of times and haven't actually kind of defined what a double spend is. Could you quickly give me your Eli 5 of what a double spend is?
Yep, absolutely. So in a centralized system, you can't really double spend. So what I'm doing is attempting to spend the same dollar twice. In the physical world, that doesn't work because I have to physically have a dollar. So if I hand it to you, it's now your dollar. I don't have a second dollar that I can conjure out of nowhere and try to respend. However, in the digital space, these are just hashes. So each coin is itself a unique string of digital numbers. Now, I can spend it to you, but if you don't confirm it, if you don't take it to somebody else to say, hey, is this actually mine? Was it given to somebody else previously? You don't actually know. So that's where proof of work comes in. This is where the honest nodes of the network mine a transaction and make sure that it was not spent separately. In practical terms, an average person doesn't really have a great ability to attempt a double spend. But if you're running a full node implementation of the mining software for Bitcoin, you can broadcast something with a very low fee so that it doesn't confirm quickly. It just hangs there. And then you can double spend. You can send the same transaction again, essentially, with a higher fee, and you can send it back to yourself, for example, or you can just send it to another person. And this is the double spend problem that Bitcoin fixes, but it fixes it practically. It doesn't fix it absolutely.
Sure. So there's this kind of narrative that if a double spend is possible, I think the most recent one was $26 or something. A relatively.
It was 21. It was about $21 when it was double spent.
Right. So, which is funny. I've heard all kinds of conspiracies about it being 21 million on the 21st and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yep.
But there's this kind of narrative that if it's possible for $21, then it's possible for $200 million. And what if governments are making transactions over the Bitcoin blockchain, and a nefarious actor spots this and somehow engineers a double spend, and all this money just evaporates? Like, is that kind of thing a genuine possibility?
It is, and Satoshi actually talked about this. So for something like $21 or or less, I mean, imagine me and you are playing a video game or poker for pennies or something. Like you and I don't really care. Like if there's some massive reorg of the blockchain and me and you lost 3 cents, it's not like we're going to lose our minds over it. But
Sure.
if I was buying a house and spending $300,000, Satoshi was very clear. Wait for more block confirmations. This is the nature of the network to allow the miners to continue to validate each other's blocks. And for each block, there's a certain amount of reward given each time you add a block to the chain.
In terms of
And
mining fee, right?
Correct. So the mining subsidy actually. So right now it's 6.25 bitcoins per block, which on BTC is I don't even know, is it because I haven't checked the price today, but
like 400,000, 350,000, something like that.
Let's say it's $400,000. Right. So if I'm spending $400,000, then those miners are being paid $400,000 to validate my block. And after 2 blocks, they've now got an $800,000 incentive to protect $400,000, and then they've got 1.2 million, going for every block. So if, however, I spend $1 billion, well, then I need to wait a lot of blocks in order for the incentive to keep my money where it is. So that's right. A concern depending on how much money you're actually spending. And that's why it's an economic concern. And the more blocks it's buried under, the safer your money
because
is.
These blocks are confirmations of the validity of the transaction, right?
Exactly.
And how many, do you know roughly? Obviously, you might not be the Bible of this, but you are a Bitcoin historian, which I will ask you about later. Roughly how many blocks are produced a day?
Per day. So it's would be a block every 10 minutes. So 6 blocks per hour times 24 hours. So that comes out to, what we got? I'm going to do a little math. I haven't had my coffee, or I'm just having my coffee today. So my brain math, it's 144 blocks a day.
Times
typically
6.2. So what, like 850 odd Bitcoin per day is still being mined out of the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea it was that high. Really interesting.
It's about 900. It's 900 Bitcoins a day are mined currently.
What's that? 500,000, 50,000.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting point. Is the Bitcoin mining operations, right? Is for BTC, current mining operations is huge business, and it's also become incredibly political, especially the past year or so. I saw an interview with Anthony Pompliano and that chap. What was his name? Veteran investor. Do you remember? Have you seen this? It was quite recent.
I don't know if I have. Michael Saylor was on with him recently from MicroStrategy.
I don't think it was Michael Saylor. No, it wasn't. But he's a kind of TradFi behemoth. He's been there for a while. And he was expressing his kind of doubts on Bitcoin against Pomp, which is obviously hilarious. But his biggest actual issue that he raised was his fear of the political control that both Russia and China will have in terms of the fact that they are now the largest miners of Bitcoins in the world, and Iran as well. And to me, that just sounds like total, CIA fear-mongering, really. But what kind of power does a miner dictate over the blockchain if they are mining a large portion?
I would say actually very little. So the mining, the real governance model of Bitcoin is that miners enforce the rules of Bitcoin, which are set in stone. Satoshi was very clear that when version 0.1 was issued, the rule set, the protocol, the fundamental stuff of Bitcoin was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. Now that's been undermined very heavily, in fact, by social distortion and venture capital and some other things. But the miners have taken a very weird sort of backseat role in a lot of ways, and allowed social pressure to steer the direction of Bitcoin. And under that situation, I think there is something of a concern that places like China and Russia and Iran have a significant amount of hash power. However, if they were to become malicious in a way that ultimately undermines the network, it's pretty trivial to split them off the network.
So what could they do with all that additional hash power that they may have?
if they were to be split from the network, what would they do?
Yeah, so you say it could be it could be a problem if they have all this hash power. So what would that lead to?
I mean, you can mine empty blocks, and so in BTC, you need these block confirmations. The way that the network has been re-engineered is that without block confirmations, the network is completely dysfunctional. Bitcoin's not supposed to be that way. Like, you and I should be able to spend $5 back and forth without block confirmations and allow that to work in real time. However, in BTC, that doesn't work, especially when the mempool is full. So there's this giant fee structuring. And you get this backup, you get this giant backlog of transactions in the mempool. And if nobody is attacking them, then nobody's getting their transactions back and forth. So the network grinds to a functional halt at that point. So an empty block attack, we used to see these more actually out of China because they had really bad connections. So what they would do is mine a private chain. They'd mine 3-4 blocks in a row that didn't have any transactions in them because they're easier to validate. And then they would push them onto the network with really high hash power, forcing everybody to reorg their blocks. And they just take block rewards, but they don't process anyone's transactions. Now,
but they're still mining BTC for the effort of doing this.
They are, but they're only mining blocks. So they're just mining for that subsidy. They are not including any transactions in those blocks.
But they're still receiving the rewarded Bitcoin, right?
Correct.
I get it.
So that's a basic attack vector in Bitcoin that we have seen in China, and it works particularly well because their connectivity is really bad. So they have this incentive to not be well connected to other miners so that they can mine private chains with lots of hash power. And then when they reconnect to the main network, bam, here's 40% of all the hash power in the world, and you're going to eat our blocks. Wow. And so that's kind of it's malicious, but it's because BTC's incentives are so bad. In BSV, by contrast, the transaction economy is what's valuable. So the block reward is the same. It's 6.25, but the dollar value is quite small.
I wonder if that was in some way a planned disconnect from the public network, because although this attack that you're talking about may have been quite dated, there is 4G, 5 bars of 4G in every single location I have ever been in China. And I've been to the top of some fucking mountains in the middle of nowhere with my phone trying to take like some Instagram videos and full 4G. Whereas when I'm at home in the UK, I could be sat in my bedroom in a fairly central location and I'm struggling to get like 2 bars of 3G. So things have, connectivity-wise, things have improved.
Well, I think part of the thing too is, so they operate behind Tor networks very often as well. So they have location issues because of the political issues in China as well with Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, the way that Bitcoin should function is that if there's a malicious actor, that the honest nodes of the network just simply censor them out. They edge them out of the network and say, hey, you're a bad actor. You're not mining for the value of the network, and it's our job to protect the network. In the Byzantine general's problem, you are acting as a malicious general, and we choose not to work with you any longer. So malice in a properly incentivized network should be punished rapidly. And then the most valuable node, the most powerful node, is that which creates the most value for people as a whole. It should be the peer that you want to connect with the most. This is why it's important to let Bitcoin be a completely free system governed by proof of work.
And that is what goes on within BSV.
Correct. This is one of the foundational principles, is restoring that economic incentive of the mining network the way that Bitcoin was intended.
Okay. So I actually want to segue onto BSV and talk a little bit about what's going on there, because it's a rabbit hole, really. You begin to look into. I saw it before my good friend mentioned it to me and told me some in-depth information about it. I saw it on the top of the leaderboards of the CoinGecko and had a look at it, and I couldn't really understand what was going on. It looked like an exact fork of Bitcoin. It was called Bitcoin, but it seemed to me when I looked a bit deeper into some information on Twitter and Reddit that there was a lot of activity going on, and a lot of legitimate activity, activity that has a, that has a result. There's actual applications that people use. There's projects that are looking rather large, and there's a huge community. So what kind of is going on BSV?
Well, everything, frankly.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, I mean, the way we see it is that Bitcoin itself is designed to be a general purpose network for all economic activity. So I think the best thing to compare it to is the internet. And so it's kind of like asking what's going on the internet. It's like, well, there's social networks, and there's, governments, and there's finance, and there's all kinds of things. And I think Bitcoin SV, more than any other blockchain, is doing exactly that, is saying, like, we want to create the most valuable tools, the most useful tools to allow any person to come up with any business model that they want in ways that can't be created anywhere else. And we believe that they will create exponential business value that brings value to the network long term, which is, I think, something that separates us from everybody else. I have not heard another community that is not, laser focused on some specific use case, or if they are a general purpose network, I don't see them doing the work necessary to allow general purpose, a global community to join and use their network, because it lacks the throughput.
Actual adoptability sort of thing, and a good example of that is Ethereum right now. A huge fan of Ethereum, I'll be honest, because it's Ethereum, right? But
sure,
it is a huge, there is a huge roadblock for onboarding new users, especially, some of my friends from back in the UK. I speak to them and I try to get them interested and aware of the things you can do on DeFi, even just using a decentralized exchange. But, it's scalable in the sense that it works, but it's not scalable in the sense that, it's absolutely it's unusable for people without a large amount of money because of the fees. And it's unfortunate to come back to the point of fees on Ethereum, because it does feel like it's the only thing that people have against it, but it is just such a huge barrier. Bitcoin's, BSV's fees, how are they looking?
Well, they're extremely small. A thousandth of a penny would be a very typical transaction fee. If BSV was doing 100,000 times the volume of Ethereum today, the transaction fee would still be a thousandth of a penny. In fact, in all testing on mainnet and on testnet, we've seen that as volume goes up, the fee actually tends to go down. And the reason for that is the same reason that in the mainstream economy, that a McDonald's burger is cheaper than your typical pub burger. And the reason is economies of scale. If you just have that much more volume, then you can lower the price of each individual unit. And we've seen that in Bitcoin because of the innate competitive nature of the mining network there as well. And also the ability to parallelize transactions. So the real limitation in Ethereum is the fact that every node has to cross every threshold together. And until each node does, you can't go forward. This is the fundamental design of a global state machine, such as Ethereum. So Ethereum is unfortunately stuck to only being as productive as the least productive node on the network.
Sure. This is something I've heard a lot recently.
Yeah, and it's just a bad design, unfortunately. But fortunately, all blockchains do essentially the same thing. We have like 6,000 blockchain protocols out there, and what they do is the same thing. They accept transactions as data, and they write them to a database any way they can. So the only truly differentiating factor between all blockchains is how much bandwidth they have. It's decentralization and some of these other things, but from a tech standpoint, it's how many transactions can you push. And BSV is that superlative network. We don't cut corners. We've seen 600, I think it was a 637 megabyte block mined from the public mempool. And in a 630 something megabyte block, that can be pushing 10 million transactions you could fit into a block that size. So that kind of thing, it's not theoretical. It was theoretical for a very long time, But we've smashed all these technical records. The things that people said were impossible on Bitcoin, we have shown
To be
many,
possible.
many magnitudes over what we've been told was physically impossible. We've just plainly done it.
So you said if BSV was running 1,000 times the price of Ethereum, the transaction volume of Ethereum, the prices would be fairly similar. Is that something that's testable? Is that obviously it's very easy to say if it was running 1,000 times as long, but in practice, if it is running the world's economy and it's running hundreds of thousands times the current transaction volume, at what point do you get kind of testing for that? At what point do you kind of get stress tests for that?
So there's a couple ways to do it. There is what is currently called the scaling testnet. Right now, it is operated by the BSV node team, which is primarily a group of people over at a company called nChain in the UK. But also they have a branch in Slovenia that has about 100 engineers that work at it as well. It's a very big team. The official BSV node team is about 25 people, but there's about 200 people total that contribute code at all. But they run the scaling test network. They've tried everything from 10 megabyte blocks to 100 megabyte blocks to gigabyte blocks. They're currently working on an implementation that they're calling TerraNode, which is a complete re-engineering of the way that a node is even understood. So rather than having a general purpose piece of mining software that is a wallet and manages RAM and CPU and all these other things, you containerize it and you deploy it in sort of like Docker or Kubernetes style, where each thing is its own containerized machine that specializes. They claim that in testing, they've seen it pushing multi-terabyte blocks without messing with the block time. So we're talking 10-minute block times, and a terabyte block is good for about 1 million transactions a second. So right there is, we're talking magnitudes more efficient than the combined throughput of Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and everybody. Right now, the only thing that we don't know, Swift and ACH are pushing something like $14 trillion in value every day across the globe.
Goodness.
Yeah, so that's a pretty high throughput network. Fedwire is of a similar technology, but they're extremely centralized, and it's just their individual ledgers. But we believe that with the TerraNode implementation, we'd be able to compete with essentially the combined efforts of every public payment rail on Earth. And that testing has been being done 24/7. It's a full-time research and development team that has been working on this for many, many years now. So there's a bunch of data. You can check it out at nChain, nchain.com. They've got a bunch of information on it.
Okay, I'll leave that in the description below. Okay, so why is BSV, considering all the things you've just told me, why is BSV, I don't even want to be so mean as to say shunned, but I think I could get away with saying that, because there is a certain, it does feel like there's a concerted dislike, a concerted disagreement with what BSV is claiming or doing, I would say doing, from what I can see. Where does that stem from? Is it like a political thing? Is it like what is it?
There's a lot of vectors at play here. I think the first one is just simple reputational risk. For 12 years now, there have been computer science experts saying that Bitcoin cannot do X, Y, and Z. And they've built big careers and they've raised lots of money based on, hey, we need to build this side chain or sub chain or this other semi or quasi centralized network or federated this and that in order to scale Bitcoin up. This would include your very typical conspiratorial bad guys like Blockstream and Lightning Labs, but it also includes a lot of people that I don't think are nefarious at all and just simply don't understand the economic incentives of the network. In fact, the very first person to ever respond to Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008 was a guy named James Donald. And he took a look at the white paper or took a look at Satoshi's original announcement, and he said, well, this can't work because everyone would need to run a node and blah, blah, blah. Satoshi said, no, you don't get it. Very quickly, he explained, we can scale up past Visa today with existing hardware and the Bitcoin protocol. And people laughed at him. People laughed at him from that point. And he was determined to solve these problems, but he was pushed out of the community very quickly by people that I think saw it as a threat to the general fintech business model. So these are your Silicon Valley.
The way of things, which is so deeply entrenched in all power structures around the world, finance, tech, government, all of these are absolutely, if Bitcoin in any of its forms or blockchain in any of its current forms makes real headways into the mainstream, they're quaking in their boots. Really, they are.
Absolutely. Well, imagine being MasterCard Corporation and you've been this giant payment titan for 50 years now. And here's a tool that is exponentially more efficient, publicly available, and there's not really a good way to make profit on it if it's allowed to scale. Well, if you look at who is the main venture backer of almost everybody in the entire crypto space, MasterCard Ventures is a huge player. They are a majority partner in companies like Kraken and Coinbase. Also places like BitGo, Fireblocks. These are the big institutional custodians. They're also a majority partner in companies like Blockstream, Lightning Labs, Ripple. They're a majority partner and co-founder of Digital Currency Group, Grayscale Investments, Genesis.
They're majority partners in all of these.
Yes. So Digital Currency Group is a conglomeration of multiple venture capital groups. But the founding partner is actually a joint venture between MasterCard and New York Life Insurance Company. And they brought a couple of Silicon Valley guys and a couple of old central banking partners. In fact, one of the advisors at Digital Currency Group is former World Bank president Lawrence Summers, who was also president of Harvard. I believe he was a White House advisor to the Clinton family and stuff as well. So he's very well connected, old world money power guy. And he sits on the board at the most powerful venture capital group in the entire blockchain economy. And we've seen that when Digital Currency Group was founded in late 2014, all of a sudden this notion that Bitcoin can't scale became the absolute. It became the official narrative of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin can't scale, Bitcoin can't do. We need to implement Lightning Network and we need to actually use a company like Coinbase to hand out debit cards, and you hold your money at Coinbase and you spend some derivative asset, or we need all these other things, and that's because it creates a business opportunity for banking essentially on Bitcoin when Bitcoin truly should have replaced them all by now. So I don't want to get super conspiratorial, but
no,
all
honestly,
of this is publicly available information.
The information you just shared now has, I like to question these things, and I think they need to be questioned and are not questioned enough. And you can already see if which is publicly available information. So I'm assuming it's true. Coinbase will be the first big crypto IPO. So that's going to be the go-to for all institutional investment. Grayscale and digital currencies in general are the bull signals for everyone. The massive accumulation of BTC in its current form, and you can just see tendrils of manipulation flowing through the whole thing, can't you? Which is really rather frightening. But at this point, obviously, there's certain levels of delusion, certain levels of hopium to think that the crypto market's just going to take over the world. But I think at this point, any exposure to the general mainstream is going to be positive. I think there's all kinds of market manipulation to come from centralized authorities, and I think a lot of people are going to get very stung by it. But I do think pushing the cryptocurrency as a system, Bitcoin as a system, into the public view is a really important step.
I think it can be. However, I'm a little concerned. I shared a tweet the other day that I saw Michael Saylor gave an interview, and Michael Saylor's bought more BTC than almost anybody in the last year. But what he said about it, he was asked why he thinks it's so important, and he says, "Well, it's this programmable internet money. You can program it to do anything, and it's capable of millions of transactions a second and all these things." I was like, well, hold on, BTC can't do those things, and I'm not sure if he's aware of that. But that was the original promise of Bitcoin, and when implemented properly and in BSV specifically, it is capable of that. But Michael Saylor blocked me on Twitter for letting him know this many times over the last 6 months, saying, Hey, Michael, you seem like a smart guy. You're a data science, a data integrity guy. You're from MIT and all these different things. Like, I know you understand the value of data, but did you know that BTC only allows you to purchase 6 megabytes per hour of data globally, and that you have to make 6 megabytes per hour work? And people telling me I'm a fool, I'm a shill, and a liar, but
this is the thing. Like,
this is reality.
When I look at the top, the top of the. Well, I just look at the price movements in BTC and I see everyone following the movements of BTC as the whole market does, so it makes sense. I just wondered, have any of these people who are actually purchasing BTC, have they ever used BTC? Like, I
don't think so.
It's such an unpleasant experience. It's such a non-user friendly experience. It's slow. It's expensive. It's very difficult to build anything on BTC. It's a very strange narrative that I don't think any of us know the answer to, because even the people who know that BTC is a dinosaur, fossil, will still, you can't reject it. It's like, it's an incumbency. Right. It's like, there's nothing you can do about it apart from ride the wave, because the price is going to go up. So if you try and short it, none of the fundamentals make sense in the current BTC positioning. Mm-hmm. Very strange. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about Satoshi. This is turning to be quite controversial, which I do like. So I'm going to push on with that. Who is Satoshi? So
I think the fairest way to put it is that Satoshi is a business entity or a corporate entity. I think the evidence shows, and if you can wade through the mass amount of confusion on the topic, I think it's very clear that Craig Wright created the Satoshi Nakamoto moniker. It was something he used for a very long time. There's evidence that it was used for years before Bitcoin ever existed. There are a number of people that have mentioned, I met a Satoshi Nakamoto, but he was this white guy at this conference talking about the future of money and all of this. And these are things happening in 2002, 2005, 2006. And then all of a sudden this Satoshi Nakamoto guy pushes out this white paper. So I think the fairest way to put it is that Craig Wright created the Satoshi Nakamoto name, and Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin. I think, depending on what you read from Craig will talk about various levels of partnerships, or that there are certain people that helped him. He talks about most commonly that the idea was his, the white paper was his. These are things that he created. He's the architect. However, I think there's probably some bricklayers involved that they did some jobs. They did some contract work. We actually know a number of them, guys like Hal Finney, Ray Dillinger, Mike Hearn. Some of these guys were very early to help implement. So were they Satoshi Nakamoto too? I don't know. Some of that is a little bit opinion based.
So it's like an umbrella term Craig the Bitcoin builders, right?
A bit, and I think there's also room to talk about guys like Dave Rees, who's an old computer scientist that Bitcoin obviously has some intellectual property from, or even like Ralph Merkle or Whitfield Diffie, some of these other guys that created a lot of the fundamental principles that became Bitcoin, and they're referenced in the white paper too. So I don't know. Like, I really hate the phrase "we're all Satoshi" because I think it's like really communist sounding. but I think the actual who is Satoshi is a little more complicated. I do believe that Craig Wright is that figurehead. I believe that Bitcoin was fundamentally his idea, and then he did the lion's share of the work. But I think there's probably a couple lower level unsung heroes involved as well.
Sure. So for anyone listening and wondering what on earth all these names are about, Bitcoin, the story of Bitcoin is actually just so it's like a movie in itself, right? There's lots of drama, there's conspiracy, there's there's unanswered questions. There's fishy murders. There's all kinds of things that make sense if what Bitcoin is trying to be is actually what it can be. If it's something that can really change the world, change the financial system, change the power structures, then all of this conspiratorial process that it's going through right now makes sense, because it's a world-changing idea. And so it makes a lot of sense that there's cloak and dagger, that there's misinformation, that there's people who are heavily involved who are being targeted, and people who are potentially supposedly murdered over their involvements in these things, and all these kinds of things that are, for anyone who's interested in deep state conspiratorial information such as this, it's definitely worth reaching out to. I'd actually like to ask you if there's any kind of good sources of information, even some YouTube videos or whatever, that people should check out if people are interested in such a thing.
I think, you can plainly go to Bitcoin Talk and look at a bunch of crazy stuff. So bitcointalk.org or .com, I forget now.
.org, I think.
Yeah, it might be .org. But you can just check out, or just Google Peter Todd and John Dillon. John Dillon is an anonymous person that showed up on bitcoin.org and put up a bounty to any Bitcoin developer that would help him with creating what's called the RBF protocol, the replace by fee protocol, which added an extra vector of double spend risk to Bitcoin. It was extremely contentious when it was added, but he paid Peter Todd, and he plainly said, "Oh, I'm a clandestine government agent, and I don't like what the government's up to, but here's this and that." And like, just reading the John Dillon Peter Todd story, it plainly ends in Peter Todd sharing personal emails between him and John Dillon, where John Dillon pretty bluntly threatens the lives of himself and his family to behave exactly the way he wanted to. And and we got this protocol is added to Bitcoin Core at the behest of this John Dillon character, who, for all intents and purposes, seems like essentially an assassin demanding something of some software developer guy. So, but he also funded a video that Peter Todd created in 2013 about exactly why the small blocker BTC narrative needs to be pushed politically. And it's a very Orwellian video. So if you can find the John Dillon YouTube video about the necessity for small blocks and lots of little nodes, it's a very creepy video. It was very much flew in the face of Satoshi and everything he said about Bitcoin. And that's a really good spot to start down a very weird rabbit hole.
Yes.
For some cloak and dagger on Bitcoin.
Yeah, it is a rabbit hole for sure. Certainly one worth delving down if blockchain interests you. So one of the really, again, it's just like a drama, this whole thing. One of the really interesting parts of it is Craig Wright, CSW, as lots of people may see him mentioned on Twitter and such. Mm-hmm. Craig Wright is supposedly the owner of, as Satoshi Nakamoto, as the owner of over 1 million Bitcoin. Is this correct? Yeah, over 1 million?
Correct. Yep. And I believe it's 1.1 as Satoshi.
1.1 million as Satoshi. And this is supposedly held in a wallet under the name of Tulip Trust, right? Is that kind of correct?
It's a series of wallets. So the trust was allegedly formed during the first year of Bitcoin. The trust had multiple blind trustees, and the reason for it was to protect himself. I believe that Craig was not himself a trustee, and it was for the sake of protecting himself and his family from the threat of violence, frankly. So if somebody broke into his house and said, "Give me all your Bitcoin," the answer is, sorry, you need to gather up the trustees and get them to spend it. I don't have it. So sure. It's a security feature that way.
I'm just doing a quick sum. Yes, so 1.1 million Bitcoin is currently worth $60.5 billion. So that's worthy of an assassination in most people's books.
Indeed.
Okay. So what makes you a Bitcoin historian, Kurt? I mean, the preceding 50 minutes has just been a perfectly good answer for that. But I've seen it. I've seen it written in capitalizations. What kind of, where does that come from?
So I've always been a history buff. I was actually a theology nerd. I wanted to be a church historian for many years, and decided against it because I got really interested in business. And so I got involved in politics of money and the history of money. So I became sort of a gold and fiat historian for some time, just amateur. And then I got involved in Bitcoin in 2012. I had some monetary activist types that I made friends with say, hey, well, we'll pay you in Bitcoin to do this thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. And so I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole real early, and just got really involved in, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? Like, damn it, I missed Satoshi by 18 months. I could have potentially talked to the guy if I was a little earlier. And so I became super obsessed with understanding fundamentally what Satoshi wanted to give to the world. And it fascinated me. But I've been involved in infrastructure. I was mining in 2013, 14. I was running nodes. I remember the scaling war. I was a Bitcoin XT and Bitcoin Unlimited supporter. I remember when Bitcoin Cash was first floated. I ended up being I was a meetup host for many, many years. So I've met a lot of people. I know some of the other old school venture capitalists. I've heard a lot of the stories behind the scenes about, hey, should we invest in this stupid startup called Blockstream? And everybody's saying, nah, they don't have a business model. That doesn't make a lick of sense. And then all of a sudden they get a $50 million seed round and that kind of stuff, So I've just kind of been there through a lot of it. In early 2017, I helped found a group called Crypto Traders, which was basically just focused on portfolio management and trading for profit. But I was brought on as the company's fundamental analyst. So it was my job to just keep my ear to the ground on all development and across the entire space.
The Bitcoin space or the blockchain space?
The whole blockchain space. So I also had experience mining Ethereum and Monero and a couple other things too. So I was very familiar with a lot of the major things going on before the previous bull run as well. And I spent a solid 2+ years just doing fundamental market research, really getting to know like lead developers and who's actually funding this project, what is your real roadmap, and accumulating knowledge. And in 2018, when BCH and BSV split,
and accumulating Bitcoin, right?
Oh, of course. So amid the BCH BSV split, I came out on the side of BSV. I've always supported big block Bitcoin, the unbounded Bitcoin protocol. And I basically just kind of accidentally became an influencer in the BSV space because I was like, hey, man, can we actually try big block Bitcoin? Like, we keep fighting about it. And you get this group of small blockers that tells us what Bitcoin can't do. And nobody wants to put the pedal to the metal and see what it takes to actually drive the thing off the track, So I've just became this passionate advocate. And CoinGeek reached out to me a couple times. Was like, hey, we'd like to hire you to do some writing. We really like the way you communicate. And I kept turning it down because I was working in cybersecurity for the last 2 years as well as kind of my other gig, and I really liked that job. So I just kept saying no, and they were like, Kurt, what do you want to be? If we were to hire you to write like an article a week or all, whatever, man, we just want you to produce some content for us. And I was like, I would like to have the ability to spend my time researching the history of Bitcoin. Nice. And I would like my title to be chief historian so that nobody gets wigged out when I'm checking out weird books or, I'm surfing the dark web. Like, that's what I want to be doing. I want to really understand the stuff about Bitcoin that everybody else either forgot or never heard. So I'm basically like a research journalist or some kind of a private investigator working in the space. And that's how I got my title, chief historian or chief Bitcoin historian at CoinGeek.com.
And that is why it's capitalized. That makes a lot of sense now.
Yes.
Very interesting. I have a few experiences with the darknet just because I thought it was super interesting and I'll try it out. But
yeah.
When I was actually interested in it, it was just too opaque for me to get any kind of real benefit out of. So maybe when the microphone's off, I might ask you a few questions.
Yeah, no problem.
But yeah, no, for sure. I think the thing that just doesn't make any sense to me is is how does BSV's future kind of change from here on out? Because BSV is in terms of tokenomics and in terms of to an extent, the total supply and the circulating supply and the halving rate and all these sort of things are the same as BTC.
Yep.
So, is BSV waiting for the flippening? Is BSV, is that even important to the BSV network to be part of that? I mean, obviously in terms of outreach and in terms of viability, but is it even important for them to be the top of the market cap list?
I think in the short term, no. Like it really doesn't matter. Building blocks right now is what actually matters. Like you can build incredible things, but if nobody wants to use them, it's irrelevant. And so BSV is this incredibly flexible tool set for people to be able to generate business. Right now, the average block size over the last month or so has been between 10 and 15 megabytes a block. Now, that's a lot of transactions. That's real big compared to every other blockchain, but 10 megabytes of data, I mean, I wouldn't pay $1 for a 10 megabyte thumb drive today. So we're not really talking about global change at this level yet either. And this is why we're continually underestimated. But at some point between 1 and 2 gigabyte average block size, it becomes perpetually more valuable to mine BSV blocks than it does to mine BTC blocks. And it's because about a 1.5 gigabyte block has more transaction fees in it than it does block reward in it. And at that point, there would be so much demand, if there's that much Bitcoin cycling, that the price would go up per coin, but also that block reward gets replaced by those transaction fees, which then would pull hash power away from BTC simply because miners follow profit. They don't care. We've seen it a number of times. As soon as it's 2% more valuable to mine BSV, you see that uptick in hash power. It just shows up. And it's because most miners are there just to simply earn as much money per second as they can. And so if we continue to grow that block size by pursuing real business and by telling people, hey, if you have a payment friction problem or a data integrity problem, we can solve it with this tool. And as they do that, well, our blocks keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes them increasingly profitable to mine. And when they become a lot more profitable to mine, all of a sudden it's a very slippery slope where BTC hash power leaves, their difficulty adjustment can't deal with it, and frankly, the blockchain locks up. BTC can't have a precipitous drop in difficulty because it'll be chain death. That is the end of the network. Mm-hmm. And so they need to start getting very, very worried when we start getting, to 800, 900, 1,000 megabyte blocks on average. The BTC people are going to be scrambling to figure out some kind of massive protocol change in order to survive what's coming. We should expect that to be a very weird era in the Bitcoin Civil War coming up. But
Bitcoin Civil War. How does that? What's the timescale that you imagine you would kind of anticipate for 1 gigabyte block sizes?
It's hard to know exactly. I'm actually under NDA because I consult a number of businesses that are moving things to the blockchain. I know some of them are talking about having millions of transactions a day each. These are companies in the healthcare space. These are companies in the gaming space. Some of these other things that just want to be generating literally 50 transactions per second per user in these environments, that there's this value created. And some of these things are imminent. One of the big ones is crypto fights. I think over the next 6 weeks.
I was just about to mention that to you. Just before we ended, I was going to ask for a little list of things to shout out for users to check out. And crypto fights was the one that I was going to shout out. Super cool. Super cool.
He's a guy that left Ethereum. The lead developer is a friend of mine. He actually came to the Chicago Bitcoin meetup, and we met. He was developing on Engine platform, Engine Coin for a little over a year, and just said like, "Hey man, Ethereum will never have the horsepower to do what I want to do with this game, and it looks like BSV is the only one that can. And what can you tell me, basically?" So we struck up a friendship, and he's now been working on crypto fights for about 2 years now. And it looks like they are right on the cusp of launching. They are in their final beta release. They're doing tournaments on the testnet and stuff. Everything seems real crisp. As soon as that thing goes live, we're going to see our block size going way up again. And that's just one business. So I really think that over the next 12 to 18 months, we could be seeing blocks that, I think people's faces are going to melt. All of a sudden, the people that are like, BSV is just an exit scam, all those people are going to start looking real silly.
Right. In the name of neutrality, how long have you thought that the blockchain, the block sizes would reach? For how long has the BSV community been saying we will reach this stage? In sense of this year, we will reach this stage. It comes to this year, we're pushing it back another year. Is that a thing that has been happening?
No, not really. I think we've actually, one of the things that I really like about BSV is it's had a very clear roadmap. As soon as the split from Bitcoin Cash happened, there was an immediate like, hey, in 6 months, we're going to raise the block size to a 2 gigabyte block size limit. We're going to change a bunch of stuff, but that's going to be the predicate for the Genesis protocol upgrade, which is when we take all the limits off of everything. So block size is not determined by the software. It's determined by whatever you're willing to try to mine. The ancestor limits, script limits, the opening up of the entire script stack language. How many scripts can you push per transaction? What is the size of data that you can push in a script per transaction? All of that is taken off in Genesis, and that happened in just February of 2020. So we're just barely a year out from there. We were very confident about 2020 being the big year for things, and then within 45 days of the Genesis upgrade coming out, we had the global pandemic hit, and a lot of people, obviously business plans got pushed back a bit. But we had announcements at CoinGeek London in late February, early March of 2020 of people saying exactly that, like, hey, we've been testing with the Genesis protocol upgrade. We're going to be able to do all these things. Here's what we're doing in 2020. The pandemic did put a bit of a comma in the sentence of our victory, but nothing's fundamentally changed on any of those fronts. These businesses are all still building. I think one of the other big ones to look at is EHR data. They want to do global healthcare data, hashed, encrypted, on-chain, making it globally available, more private, that kind of thing. And if we're talking about the data of billions of people on chain interacting, interoperating with hospitals, insurance companies, other healthcare providers all on chain. As soon as that one launches, there's we're going to see some fireworks too.
Yes, I can see why
there's lots of those.
Why people call you a BSV influencer. It's a very bullish talk right now.
Indeed. Well, and the thing is like I truly believe that it is the best fundamental investment probably in a generation. Like Bitcoin, and I was a guy who saw Bitcoin as that in 2012. I was looking at a $10 Bitcoin when everyone was saying, I don't know, it's some kind of scammy video game money, and saying, hey, this is going to change the whole world, everybody. And I still have people telling me I don't understand Bitcoin, and
dude,
frankly
$10
think it's pretty
Bitcoin. Funny.
That
makes me so sad. That makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Kudos. Awesome. You said the CoinGeek London convention, and then you said Chicago. Where in the world are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I am in Chicago. Chicago's home. I was born in the same hospital my father was born in, so I'm very much a Chicagoan.
Nice.
For many generations, this is home. We're it, man. We're hustler city. It's one of the biggest commodity trading cities in the world. In fact, one of the most vibrant places on earth. I recommend everybody come to Chicago if you want to see, frankly, anything, because we got it.
Nice. Isn't Chicago having like a huge, resurgence, like an economic resurgence. I was reading up somewhere like Boston and Chicago or something like two of the most up and coming cities in the US at the moment.
So Chicago is really, really blessed to have a lot of natural resources surrounding it and a very diverse economic posture. So Chicago is a finance city, it's a manufacturing city, it's a shipping city. It's everything. I mean, we're the corporation, we're the corporate heads of Boeing and large pharmaceutical companies, and all kinds of companies are based in Chicago. But it also has a vibrant low level, just small shops, small businesses, vibrant neighborhoods. We've got about 10 million people that live in the greater Chicago land area. It's about a 50-mile circle around the city. And then it's surrounded by some of the most fertile land on earth. So we grow most of the earth's corn and soy and everything else. It goes into the city to get processed. So it's like we're agrarian, we're industrial, we're high tech, we're big finance. We're a very hard city to kill. So recessions, people tend to move to Chicago and make names for themselves. Yeah, so it's a pretty special place.
Well, I haven't been anywhere apart from Florida when I was younger in America yet. So when I do go, I'll definitely check out Chicago. And
Absolutely.
If you're in London at any point, be sure to hit me up.
Absolutely.
I'm going to shoot because it's very late here.
No problem.
But I really appreciate, the worst part is that, well, the best part is, let me rephrase, the best part is that I have barely even scratched the surface of what is actually going on currently on BSV in terms of actual implementations, talking about actual projects of interest. So as the crypto space moves on at rapid pace, and as things continue to get increasingly insane, it would be really interesting to do a bit more research into BSV and have you back on and talk a bit more about the specifics of what, just the positives of what's going on BSV. We've talked really nicely about the politics, the conspiracy, the controversy surrounding the whole thing, which I'm glad. But at some point in the future, it would be good to come back on and talk about all the great things. I mean, for starters, on BSV, you should check out Handcash. I think that's the go-to wallet, right, for BSV users, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's a very, very, very simple wallet to use, and it also integrates with a bunch of the games and other applications. So Bitcoin is both a payments universe and an application universe, and Handcash allows you to interface really, really simply, really smoothly with both.
I made my first Handcash 2 days ago, so I'm super excited about that.
Welcome.
Oh, funny. Okay, yes, lovely. Really great speaking to you, Kurt, and I will
likewise.
Speak to you again soon. Cheers, mate.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.